This package maintains the city's focus on investing in our most vulnerable, rejecting austerity, and ensuring vital jumpstart revenue is targeted at the original intent to grow our health of our economy and to grow the health of the community.
Well, that's Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda, budget chair for the Seattle City Council, laying out her top priorities as she rebalances the budget proposal sent to the council by Mayor Bruce Harrell. Where does she want to prioritize spending? And what are the economic forecasts saying about Seattle's budget situation as well? Plus, what's wrong with the city's permitting process, and why are parking rates jumping up so high in some neighborhoods? Well, we've got these stories and a whole lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine, and I am joined by my co-host, the incredible David Croman, reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I thought I could overhear a shout of joy from the peninsula earlier this week when the Astros lost their playoff series to the Rangers. It's not like I want certain teams to fail, but I just want certain teams like the Astros to fail. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, it's unequivocally a good thing for the Astros to lose. It is less of a good thing for the Rangers to win, but I'll take the trade-off for now.
That's fair. That's fair. I love it. Thank you, David, as always, for joining me here. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. A shout out to Xana this week. Thank you for becoming a patron of the show, Xana, and listening in. We would love to get your support at the $5 level so we can send you your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. Also help you access the Patrons First content that this podcast offers. Patrons, we are here for you, always interested to get your questions about local politics and help you answer them. And if you want to see our smiling faces, well, check out this podcast on Converge Media. You can catch the show on Wednesday nights on Converge at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Converge. Thank you, Xana. Thanks to all of our patrons. Can't do this without you. Let's get rolling with right here, right now. The city budget, again, our top story this week as we examine the rebalancing package set out by Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda and the jumpstart payroll tax that impacts our city's large employers. Very much at the middle of this, Mayor Harrell's proposal said, all right, let's move some of that jumpstart tax spending towards some other priorities. Councilmember Mosqueda's response is, well, I'll tell you what, let's move about $20 million of that back to jumpstart priorities like affordable housing and the Green New Deal. And so here we are, a bit of a back and forth between the mayor and the budget chair here. I should point out that Councilmember Mosqueda did not cut the mayor's $1.8 million plan for shot spotter technology, tracking down gunshot crimes. So perhaps some give and take here behind the scenes. David, just some overall thoughts on what you're observing with Councilmember Mosqueda's rebalancing proposal here.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to guess that this is exactly what would have happened, she's always been, she was the one who kind of made this tax happen in the first place. And part of that was came with a pledge that it was going to be spent on specific things, namely affordable housing and Green New Deal projects. And so, we've talked a bunch about how when there's, how the Jumpstart is sort of turning a little bit into a slush fund where it's one of few kind of bright spots in the revenue picture. And so, of course, there's going to be some fights over where that money ends up. I would have been surprised, honestly, if Teresa Mosqueda had not tried to move some of this money back towards its original purposes. Yeah. It does create some issues in other places, but I don't see that. There have been some kind of nasty fights between the council and the mayor's office in the past. I doubt that this is one of them. I think probably Harrell's office expected something like this, and as you mentioned, that some of his priorities are not on the chopping block apparently. And so that. Whereas, ShotSpotter has been on the chopping block before. It's interesting that being left in. And so I don't have my ear to the ground over there, but perhaps it's some kind of peace offering of sorts.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And it was interesting, actually, to hear council members Strauss and Lewis, who both happen to be running for re-election here, voicing some support for ShotSpotter, where they've been a little bit more ambiguous on that in the past. And the council has certainly spoken out against ShotSpotter. But maybe we can go down that public safety path a little bit further here, David, because I thought it was another important point here. Public Safety Chair Lisa Herbold has made an amendment to renew the proviso set by the council last year that says SPD, the Seattle Police Department, can spend salary savings on the things they need, like overtime pay. But if there are any unauthorized uses, well, that needs council approval. And I know that the SPD has been running up plenty of overtime bills with its current staffing the way it is, but David, I just kind of wonder, where did this fierce debate of a few years ago regarding these salary savings go? Is it defunding the police is turned into refunding the police? Where do you see this police funding piece going?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does. The temperature does seem to be off a little bit, because I think in the context of the kind of quote defund the police stuff, this maneuver, I suppose, of like taking unspent salary money and putting it towards something else, from a political perspective, can be cast as you are defunding the police, because it is a reduction of budget. Sure. Outside of the defund the police context, I think it's a pretty darn normal thing to do. I mean, in fact, Governor Inslee, in his budget, there was some leftover Washington State Patrol budget, because for exactly this reason, they haven't hit their hiring marks, and so they have leftover. And so Governor Inslee has, in his previous budget, moved some of his money to other places. So it's and no one ever really accused him of defunding the police. So I think it was pretty hypercharged there for a while, when, in any other context outside of basically 2020 or 2021, I'm not sure. I mean, of course, the Seattle Police Department would prefer to keep this money, but that's kind of a normal budget fight rather than the kind of supercharged budget fight of defunding police.
Right. And it's interesting to watch these overtime costs go up. I know that was something that a lot of watchdogs of the Seattle Police Department were really keeping a close eye on over the past couple of years, but I think that's the reality of the situation now. SPD needs this overtime money out there in terms of getting a crew there out on the streets, a squad there out on the streets that's able to cover the different crimes they're trying to cover, because response times are not looking so good either. I did want to wrap up this thought by making sure I mention to folks the next budget committee meeting, 10 a.m. on the 27th on Seattle Channel. We'll see a few more amendments at that time, and we'll try to break them down for you next week on the podcast here. There was something hidden behind all the budget action here that I thought was interesting, folks. A special meeting of the Land Use Committee last week presenting an audit of the construction permitting process in the city of Seattle. What did the city auditor find? Perhaps not a surprise to some people who've tried to file permits with the city. I'm one of them here. This process needs more customer focus and consistency. As the presentation to the council was titled, the city's not tracking the amount of time that is used to review permits. It's not clear in how it prioritizes applications, and it needs a better ethical culture, is what the auditor found here. And David, I just thought this was a big deal because in looking at the budget, I know that we've talked about this. Real estate excise taxes are down. We don't see as many projects cooking. Construction permits are down too, 16% compared to last year, 44% compared to 2019. When you have a bad permitting process, it can cost the city money. That's a big bottom line here.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have a bad permitting process, I think there was, for a few years there, sort of a certain amount of taking for granted the environment the building environment. I mean, interest rates were nothing. The money was cheap. There was a lot of demand. Staffing and supply chains weren't what they were. And so, that was probably the time to figure out the permitting process so that you could get those projects up and building as quickly as possible. The fact now that we're in exactly the opposite environment, it's a terrible time to be building. So, I don't know specific examples, but I imagine there were a lot of projects that applied for a permit in the good times and have seen their projects slip into the bad times. And suddenly
that's happened.
It doesn't pencil out as well. I mean, that's like, if your goal is to build as much housing as quickly as you can, permitting might make people's eyes glaze over, but the real world effects are pretty significant.
Yeah. And there's another story behind the story here too, David, which I thought was interesting. The auditor's report shows the median time for review is about 50 days for these projects, but at least 10% of the applications took at least 145 days. So just about 5 months. Think about that, which goes well past the 120-day deadline that is set in state law for these types of reviews. Throw on top of that, it appears the city is not meeting its own race and social justice initiative goals. One applicant said, "I can't imagine what it would be like if English was my second language. This is impossible to navigate." And I think about this, a poor permitting process could eventually cause some legal headaches for the city too, David. Do you think?
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, we've seen quite a few settlements in the city over kind of racial discrimination cases. The city has insurance for stuff like that, but of course you don't want to be, dealing with that. I mean, of course, if the complaints are valid, that's even worse. And so, it's an issue, and it's bad for the individual and bad for the whole system.
Yeah, bad for the city of Seattle for sure. And I'm waiting to see when the changes actually come with this. But this is something that Councilmember Dan Strauss brought up with a special meeting right in the middle of the budget process. So he's trying to address this issue. Also, I should point out again, he is running for office, so he's trying to jam in as many things as he can before that November deadline, if you want to look at it that way, Election Day. So a lot still ahead with this, and I'd love to follow up on that with you, David, later on as we hear some more from Councilmember Strauss and the City Council on that. I know they're going to put this on the back burner until the budget's done in November, but again, something we'll continue to track here. All right, something else we also need to track, the beginning of enacting Seattle's new drug law. What's it been like on the streets? We're going to break that down coming up here on our next segment here. Now hear this. Well, we talked about the grim new record set for drug overdose deaths in King County last week. What's our region doing about it? Enter the new drug ordinance passed by the city of Seattle in September. Officially went into effect 30 days later, which was last Friday. How's that new law going to help? Chief Adrian Diaz of the Seattle Police Department broke it down on Fox 13 News.
I think that we've allowed people to be left on the streets way too long. And I think this ordinance allows us to be able to be a lot more effective in our work.
So, David, the reports I saw from last week indicated there were 25 arrests. There were about a dozen people referred into treatment. This happening in areas where the city has had some problems. The police were cracking down around 3rd Avenue, 12th and Jackson as well. But even with a new law in place, which the mayor has been telling us is all about leading with compassion and making sure people who need help get into treatment, even with that, I just come back to this question of how sustainable this is. Well, what's your take on this early rollout of the city's new drug law, David?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. It sort of reminds me of what we saw when Mayor Harrell took office. There was a flurry of activity around some of these exact same spots, got news coverage, and then then they were empty for a little bit. But then if you were to go back there a couple months later, it's unclear that anything ever actually changed or happened. So that's always the question. And I think, my colleagues wrote about a clearing happening. I think it was at 12th and Jackson, which is a, pretty tough location if you come through there. And there was quite a flurry of activity. But they talked to a business owner who was like, basically expressed that, which is not fine, but we'll see what happens in a few months. And I think that is the question. And that's always really been the question around this drug law is, sure, I suppose it opens the door for arrests like this, although you can make the argument they could have done that without this law anyway.
Right.
And it also in theory sort of opens up referrals to services. Again, you could make the argument you didn't need the law to do that, but the question has always been, does it actually, solve things from like a systemic, at the roots? And I don't know, maybe it will. I'm not saying it won't, but it's probably too early to say so.
Yeah, and it was mentioned in some of the pieces written by your colleagues for the Times, certainly, that with this system, there were actually, the outreach happened, if you want to call it that. The police engaging with this people actually did land some people into treatment. But I think about those different numbers, and granted, we're talking about dozens here rather than, issues of thousands of people who are homeless here. There's some intersection with drug activity there, of course. But it did sound like this situation where the officers were going through the streets and handing out flyers warning people there that these arrests were potentially coming, or at least this clearing out here. It almost felt like the city's approach to homelessness, or homeless encampments, giving that 48-hour warning. And it just had me thinking about this larger issue. What sort of metrics do you look at as a city when you think about this drug law going into the future here? Is it how many people were arrested? How many people went into treatment? And I just try to look at this because I know whenever I talk to Seattle city leaders, they say, yeah, we're data-driven here. How do you measure the effectiveness of this new law? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think this has always been a difficult part of just homelessness in general, is how you qualify when someone is no longer homeless. I mean, for a lot of these programs, it's sort of done by, do they not show up in the system again? You give someone an apartment or whatever and kind of help them. And if they don't show up in a shelter later or some other system, then they are considered housed. There are, some obvious holes in that logic. I mean, people maybe go back to living in an encampment or leave town and go and live somewhere else, but still struggle with homelessness. It's and so it's always been a question of like how you're actually, is the data you're getting actually good data? I think in an ideal world, you say, we have all these spots in treatment and they're being filled, but there's of course not enough spots in treatment, I think, to use that number as like a, we're making real progress here, because I think it's pretty easy to fill some spots at this point. So yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. I think it's one that I think Mark Dones at King County Regional Homelessness Authority had kind of pushed for a little bit better data collection around some of this stuff. I'm not sure what the progress was there. Question for my Project Homeless colleagues at the Seattle Times.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a question for the city too, and for the police department, if that's going to be the agency that again is kind of the tip of the spear in dealing with this drug law and dealing with the city's overall, how are we handling public use of drugs kind of a policy. I'm interested to see that, because it has to be in coordination with some of these other projects out there like LEAD, some of those other different outreach efforts that go out there and try to connect with people. But yeah, this is one of those things where measuring it is the big issue, and maybe it's just seeing less activity in these areas like 12th and Jackson and 3rd Avenue, but then there's the matter of sustaining it as well. So yeah, thank you for going through that with me there, David. I know there's a lot still ahead on that too, but I did want to give people a double dose of transportation news this week if I could, and I'm starting with parking rates if I could with you here, David. So these changed citywide for the third time this year on Monday of this week. They're going up in 19 neighborhoods. You got your Ballards, you got your Capitol Hills, your South Lake Unions, going down in 7 other neighborhoods where the action isn't as much in terms of traffic downtown. My first take on this, David, it would appear that more people are starting to come into Seattle in parking cars, maybe getting closer to pre-pandemic levels. Is that what you're getting out of this story?
It seems like it. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of anecdotal. I haven't seen what the data says exactly. But yeah, I mean, this is the way. I mean, if you're not going to add more parking, which I think, with the exception of some private development, I think the city's not adding more parking, then the way you regulate is with prices. Because if if there's too much, it's sort of like with the HOV lanes on 405 or whatever, to kind of regulate traffic, you can use price, and people will pay it. Some people pay it, some people won't. So yeah, I think I think that's what's they're responding to. I imagine also they're responding a bit to the revenue being down. I mean, this could theoretically bring in a little bit more money. I mean, it's just, there's inflation too. I mean, it's you don't keep the parking rates at the same rate as 1990s or whatever, and so up they go. Transit is improving, I think, to a certain extent, so people have more options that they can get in. Seems sort of par for the course. I'm sure it will frustrate some people though.
Yeah, always. I wanted to talk about this because it also seems like such a weird science project, kind of like, okay, if we raise rates 50 cents an hour in some areas, is that really going to lead to those magical 1 or 2 spaces being open? I wonder how they figure out how to set these rates and how those numbers actually have an impact there. That's are people not willing to pay that extra 50 cents and that actually opens up a space? That's my big question on this.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, one thing I could think of is maybe, if you kind of close the gap a little bit between some of the private parking and the public parking, then more people might, say, I'll just go into the private lot or whatever. I mean, if you're also, somebody who drives in to work every day or whatever, and you're used to finding a street parking spot, suddenly if you're, I don't know, whatever it is, $10 a day. I have not driven in and parked in a while, so I don't actually know what it's like to park for a full day. Partially because it costs too much. I mean, that's part of the calculation is, if it starts to add up, you do that every day, and you're suddenly looking at several $100s a month to park on the street.
Right.
You might figure out a way to win. I think some people will call that kind of social engineering and with a negative connotation. Other people will call that social engineering with a positive connotation, which is we want fewer people to drive. And so, if you want to park a car, and this is public space that we're providing to people to park their private vehicles. So there is it's not free for the city to be providing this space on several levels. And so I think there are probably urbanistites out there who would like to see the prices even higher.
Yeah, no, last touch on this. I know you did a piece last year when the parking enforcement officers were quickly shifted over to the Department of Transportation for a short while. Then they were shifted back to the police department. It looks like things are back online. They're such that if there are parking tickets, et cetera, put out there, it would not turn into another boondoggle where they had these officers who were writing these tickets without the full powers of the law behind them. Does that look like that situation's been calmed down from, at least from your last reporting on this, David?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything else. I think they have sort of sorted that out. Okay. Frankly, there was some disagreement around whether or not those parking tickets were actually invalid at all. But I think the mayor's office pulled the trigger on that because just to be safe. But yeah, no, the special commissions and all that seems to have been worked out. And it's not to say that everything is perfect in the parking enforcement guild or whatever, but if you get a parking ticket, you should probably pay it.
Okay. All right. Words of advice to live by there. Don't always follow leaders, watch your parking meters. I don't think I'm quoting that right. But David, thank you very much for breaking those pieces down there. All right. We need to move on to our next story here. And it's an important one that David has put together here. What do you think your kids should be studying in college if they want a really good job when they graduate? David's got a couple ideas on this. That's next on Transportation Talk. David, I wanted to break down a story you wrote recently for the Seattle Times with regard to the need for civil engineers in our state. And specifically, you actually tracked down a young woman who was in the process of graduating from college, and it sounded like the job offers were really rolling in. Tell us about this.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I had actually, it came from a story I did a few weeks ago about how the state was not getting as many bids for large transportation projects as they wanted. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But one thing that came up in our conversations that I thought I hadn't heard before was just that these contractors don't have enough civil engineers and therefore don't have enough capacity to both bid on as many projects as they might otherwise have done. And so, I wanted to learn a little bit more about that and found out that, like a lot of industries, there's sort of a, quote, silver tsunami happening a bit in the civil engineering world. There are a lot of retirements and a lot of people leaving the field. So just to replace them, the United States really needs to hire like 25,000 people a year.
Wow.
We are not graduating anywhere close to that. Well, we're graduating about 21,000 across the country. And, in Washington State, you see it at both WSU and UW. Their enrollment is declining, even as other engineering fields like AI or robotics. Those are seeing booms in the number of people who want to graduate in that. Meanwhile, civil engineering, for example, at WSU is down 35% in just 4 years, which is pretty dramatic. And so, just replacing the people retiring, we're not even keeping up with that. But at the same time, we live in Washington State, where there's Sound Transit, where there's move ahead transportation package at the state level, and then of course oodles of federal money coming in also. And so not only do we need to be replacing attrition, we need to be adding to keep up with all this work, and we're just not doing it. So the result is, if you're a 21-year-old undergraduate who is about to graduate with a civil engineering degree, can pretty well guarantee that you're going to get immediate offers. And so this one person I talked to who was a senior at UW, 22 undergrad, thought she'd kind of casually look around in the fall of her senior year for jobs. And in November, so this is like, 7 months before she's graduating, had 4 offers to come work.
Wow.
And they were trying to convince her to start working part-time for them before she even graduated. That's how badly they wanted her. So, if you're, and I've heard this from a few people, that if you want basically guaranteed employment right now, civil engineering is your path.
Interesting. And you bring up some great points about there are some needs from the city. I think about the state and the city of Seattle specifically with the Move Seattle levy. They're having such a tough time getting some projects even out the door. And I know there's a number of different reasons for that, but I think about that. I think staffing and making sure you have contractors able to move in and spend these dollars for a levy that's up for renewal next year. I think there's some pressure from the bigger governments out there maybe at the top of this on these contractors. Hey, we need to get this done and need to get this done quickly. I feel like that's part of the equation here too.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think because the kind of rule in government is like you never want to leave money unspent, because if you leave money unspent, then when budget renewal comes around, you're going to get the amount of money that you spent. And so it's not. It's a funny time, because on the one hand, projects are way more expensive and going way over budget, and so, but then on the other hand, getting the dollars out the door is sort of difficult. So you have two different scenarios in which things are costing way more money than they expected, but also governments like the city of Seattle, SDOT, are not spending as much money as they said they would, because it's difficult to get projects off the ground. WashDOT did a survey of contractors asking them basically, why aren't you bidding on our projects? And more than a third said, just we don't have the people to do it. So it's not an insignificant problem, and it really kind of clouds the ambitions of regional government, state government, and federal government if there just aren't people to do these jobs.
Yeah. Wow. Such an interesting piece, David, with so many facets to it. I appreciate the reporting as always. And unfortunately, we need to start wrapping up the show. And I thought it was very interesting. And I think many of us in the news world were having fun with a poll from Strategies 360 and Como released last week that showed just how popular different institutions are in our region. City Council, a 20% favorability rating, maybe no surprise there. SPD, not much higher at 33%. What surprised you most about this poll?
Well, two things. I think the sort of punchline was, measuring people against pickleball's popularity.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good luck with that.
It's funny that it only had 44% approval rating. I think it only had like 10% disapproval. So that suggests to me that most people are like, I don't care about pickleball, which is fair. But the light rail expansion, I considered writing a story about this. We didn't end up doing it. The light rail expansion question had like 85%.
84%, man. That was crazy. It was one of the top ones.
That is crazy.
Like that above the Seattle Kraken at 68%. Right. Keep going.
Yeah. That's interesting. At the same time, I think in a vacuum, most people would be like, yeah, sure, I'd love more light rail. As we've seen with Sound Transit, the difference between theory and practice is a pretty large gulf when you start asking about dollar figures and implementation timelines and how long it's going to take to do these things. I think people sour a little bit. That said, it's not to discount. I mean, 85% is 85%. This is a region that is, at least in theory, hungry for more light rail.
Wow. Yeah. We'll see what happens with all the pickleball courts and any of our elected leaders for that matter. Favorability ratings between these are fascinating to watch. So, David, thank you as always for joining me here. Thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to listen. We like to deliver this to you. Please also find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. We would love to get your support there, at least at the $5 level, so we can keep this enterprise going on. Show your support if you could. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We will see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.